The night was cold and wet, and rain kept falling over the giant city. Blue and red lights from flying cars reflected on the streets below, making the water shine like moving glass. People walked quickly under umbrellas and coats, trying to get home before the rain became stronger above the city. Large security drones moved slowly between tall buildings, their bright red lights scanning everything below. For most people, this was just another normal night. But for one man, this night was about to change everything. Daniel walked alone through the street with tired eyes and slow steps. He had just finished another long day at work. His jacket was old, his shoes were wet, and his face showed the tired look of someone who worked too much and slept too little. He lived alone in a small apartment on the edge of the city. Nothing exciting ever happened in his life. Every day felt almost the same: work, eat, sleep, repeat. Daniel pulled his jacket tighter as cold wind hit his face. "Just a little more," he said quietly to himself. He turned into a smaller street between two large buildings. This path was darker and quieter, but it was a shortcut to his apartment. Rainwater slowly moved across the metal ground. The only sounds were rain hitting the walls and distant flying cars high above. Then suddenly Daniel stopped walking. He heard something, a sound, very soft, very weak. At first he thought he imagined it. He looked around, but saw nothing except trash containers and shadows. Then he heard it again, a small crying sound. Daniel frowned. He slowly looked toward a group of large metal garbage containers standing near the wall. "A cat?" he whispered. The crying sound came again. But this time it did not sound like a cat. It sounded almost like a child. Daniel stared at the containers for a few seconds. Something felt strange. Who would leave a child here in the middle of the night? He walked closer, carefully stepping around puddles of water. The sound became clearer, small, weak breathing, shaking sounds. Daniel slowly reached the largest container. He looked inside. For a moment, his mind became completely empty. Something was hiding there. No someone. A small figure sat in the corner, covered by old pieces of cloth and broken bags. Daniel's eyes widened. It was a child, but not a human child. She looked around 6 or 7 years old. Her skin had a very soft silver color. Long white hair covered part of her face. Small glowing blue marks moved slowly across her skin like tiny lights underwater. Her eyes were large, bright, and filled with fear. Daniel stood completely still. The little girl looked back at him, terrified. For a few seconds neither of them moved. Rain continued falling around them. Daniel could see scratches and bruises on her small arms. She looked cold, weak, and hungry. Then suddenly the child moved backward deeper into the container. She pressed herself against the wall and stared at him with frightened eyes. Daniel slowly raised his hands. No, it's okay," he said softly. "I won't hurt you," the child continued shaking. Daniel looked around quickly. Something felt wrong, very wrong. Why would an alien child be here, and why was she alone? Slowly he reached his hand toward her. For a few seconds nothing happened. Then the little girl looked at his face carefully. Maybe she saw something different. Maybe she saw kindness. Very slowly she moved forward. Then her small hand suddenly grabbed the back of Daniel's jacket tightly. Daniel froze. She was shaking badly, like she was afraid of something much worse than him. Then suddenly a red light moved across the alley wall. Daniel turned around quickly. Another red light followed. Then another. His eyes moved upward, above the buildings. Security drones were slowly stopping in the sky. Their scanning lights moved across the streets below. Then a cold robotic voice echoed through the rain. "Target located." The red lights above the alley became brighter. Daniel's heart started beating faster. The small alien girl held the back of his jacket tightly and moved closer behind him. Her small fingers were shaking so much that he could feel it through the wet fabric. Above them, 3 security drones slowly moved between the buildings. Their red scanning lights passed across walls, trash containers, and wet streets below. Rain continued falling quietly, but now the alley no longer felt empty. It felt like something dangerous had entered the night. Daniel looked up carefully. He did not understand what was happening. He did not know who the little girl was, but one thing was becoming very clear. Someone was searching for her, and they had already come too close. The robotic voice echoed again through the rain. Unknown life form detected. Beginning identification. Daniel looked at the child. Her face suddenly became pale. Fear filled her glowing eyes. Then she quietly whispered strange words, words Daniel had never heard before. Her voice was small and broken, almost like she was begging. Daniel could not understand the language, but he understood the fear inside it. Without thinking any longer, he made a choice. "Come with me," he whispered. The child looked at him. For a moment she did not move, then she slowly nodded. Daniel quickly removed his jacket and covered her small body. The jacket was already wet from rain, but it still hid her glowing skin. He carefully picked her up. She was very light. Much lighter than he expected, almost like he was carrying nothing at all. The child immediately held his shirt tightly and buried her face against him. Daniel quickly walked toward the end of the alley, trying to stay under shadows. Above them, the drones continued scanning the streets. Their lights moved closer and closer. Daniel tried not to look nervous. He lowered his head and continued walking normally. One drone suddenly stopped above the road. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. The machine slowly turned toward him. A bright red light moved across his body. For one long second, everything felt frozen. Rain, wind, sounds, everything. The child stopped breathing. Daniel stopped breathing too. Citizen detected. Identity scan complete. No threat found. The drone moved away. Daniel released a breath he did not know he was holding. He kept walking faster now. After several minutes, he finally reached his apartment building. The place looked old and tired. Most of the lights inside no longer worked. The walls had cracks everywhere. And the elevator had stopped working years ago. Daniel climbed the stairs quickly. The little girl never let go of him. Finally, he reached his room and opened the door. The small apartment was dark and quiet. There was an old couch, a tiny kitchen, and a small table near the window. Nothing special. But tonight it felt safer than anywhere else in the city. Daniel locked the door immediately. Then he closed every curtain near the windows. Only after that did he slowly put the little girl down on the couch. For the first time, she looked around the room carefully. Her eyes moved across every corner. Every object, every shadow. She still looked scared. Daniel walked into the kitchen and returned with a glass of water and some bread. He placed them on the table slowly. "It's not much," he said quietly. The child stared at the food. She looked confused. Then slowly she looked at Daniel. Daniel picked up a small piece of bread and pretended to eat it first. "It's okay," he said with a small smile. A few seconds passed. Then carefully she picked up the bread. She ate slowly, like someone who had not eaten in a long time. Daniel sat quietly across from her, watching. Questions filled his mind. Who was she? Where did she come from? Who was hunting her? And why did those drones call her a target? Then suddenly Daniel noticed something. The glowing blue marks on her arm were changing. They were moving, slowly. They formed strange symbols across her skin. Daniel stared at them silently. And then the symbols formed one word in English: run. Morning should have brought peace, but Daniel did not feel peaceful at all. Gray light entered slowly through the small cracks in the curtains. Rain had stopped during the night. Yet the apartment still felt cold and heavy. Daniel had barely slept. He sat on an old chair near the window and kept thinking about the strange word he saw on the girl's arm. Run. He knew what he saw. He was sure of it. The glowing marks had moved like living things under her skin. And for a few seconds they had formed a human word. Then they disappeared again. Daniel looked toward the couch. The little alien girl was sleeping quietly under a blanket. For the first time since he found her, she looked peaceful. She held the edge of the blanket with both hands like a child afraid someone would take it away. Daniel stared at her silently. He still had too many questions. But before he could think more, a loud sound suddenly came from outside. Boom! The entire building shook slightly. Daniel stood up immediately. People outside started shouting. He quickly moved toward the window and opened the curtain just a little. His eyes widened. Several black vehicles were moving through the street below. They were unlike normal police vehicles, long metal bodies, dark glass, and strange blue lights moving across the sides. People stood far away and watched silently. Then the doors opened. Tall figures stepped out. Daniel felt cold immediately. They wore dark armor from head to toe. No faces could be seen. Only black helmets with glowing red lines across the front. There were at least 10 of them. They moved together without saying anything. Like machines, Daniel's stomach tightened. Something about them felt wrong. Very wrong. Then a voice echoed from outside through loudspeakers. Area search operation in progress. Remain calm and stay inside your homes. Daniel looked back at the couch quickly. The little girl was awake now, and her face had completely changed. All color disappeared from her face. Her eyes became wide with fear. She stared toward the window without blinking. Then suddenly she jumped off the couch and quickly hid behind Daniel. Her small hands grabbed his shirt tightly. She was shaking again. Daniel slowly looked down at her. "You know them," he whispered. The child looked up at him. For a few seconds she said nothing. Then slowly she nodded. Daniel felt his heartbeat become faster outside. Heavy footsteps entered the building. Thump, thump, thump. Daniel froze. They were inside. Someone was searching every apartment. The child suddenly pulled his sleeve and pointed toward a small storage room near the kitchen. Daniel understood immediately. He quickly opened the small door. "Hide inside," he whispered. The child looked at him nervously. For a second she did not move. Maybe she was afraid he would leave her. Daniel gently placed his hand on her head. "I'll be here," he said quietly. Slowly she stepped inside. Daniel closed the door carefully. Outside the apartment, footsteps became closer. Then closer, then they stopped. Right outside his door, silence filled the room. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat. Then came a knock, 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 not loud. Not angry, almost calm. A cold voice spoke from outside. "Routine inspection." Daniel swallowed slowly and walked toward the door. His hand felt cold as he touched it. He opened it halfway. One armored figure stood outside. 2 more stood behind him in the hallway. Daniel could not see their faces behind the black helmets. The figure stared at him for several long seconds. Then the voice came again. "Have you seen anything unusual tonight?" Daniel tried to stay calm. "No," he answered. The figure continued staring at him. Too long, much too long. Then suddenly the soldier lifted his hand. A small device appeared from his armor. Blue light moved across the room behind Daniel, scanning everything slowly, the couch, the table, the kitchen. Daniel felt his chest tighten. The storage room. The blue light moved closer and closer toward the storage room door. Daniel stopped breathing. Then suddenly the device made a sound. Beep, beep. The armored soldier became completely still. Then his helmet slowly turned toward Daniel. Life form detected. The apartment suddenly felt smaller than ever. Daniel stood frozen near the door. The armored soldier did not move. The red line across his black helmet became brighter, behind him. The 2 other soldiers slowly looked toward the storage room. Nobody spoke for a few long seconds. Only the soft sound of the scanner could be heard. Beep, beep. Daniel's heart was beating so hard that he felt it in his chest. His mind started searching for an answer. Any answer. Something believable. Something fast. Then Daniel forced a small nervous laugh. "Oh. That," he said. The soldiers looked at him silently. Daniel pointed toward the storage room. "Probably my cleaning robot," he said. "It broke last month. Sometimes it turns on by itself." Silence. The armored figures stared at him without moving. Daniel suddenly hated silence, because silence meant they were thinking. And thinking was dangerous. The main soldier slowly tilted his head, almost like he was studying him. Then the robotic voice spoke again. "Open the room." Daniel felt cold from head to toe. For 1 second his mind became empty. Behind that small door, the alien child was hiding. And if these people found her, everything would end. Daniel slowly walked toward the storage room. Each step felt heavier than the last one. He reached for the handle, then stopped. His eyes moved toward the small mirror hanging beside the kitchen wall. And something strange caught his attention. The mirror showed the room behind him. The soldiers, the hallway, the walls, everything. Everything except one thing. The blue scanner light. Daniel frowned slightly. The light was moving around the room, but it did not appear inside the mirror. For a moment he felt confused. Then suddenly he remembered something from years ago. He once watched a science documentary. It talked about advanced scan technology. Some systems could be tricked by energy interference. Small changes, reflections, signal confusion. Daniel quickly looked toward the old metal heater near the wall. The heater was broken, but sometimes it still released strange electric signals. A crazy idea entered his mind, very crazy. But it was the only thing he had. Daniel suddenly pointed behind the soldiers. "Wait," he said. The soldiers turned slightly. Only for 1 second, but 1 second was enough. Daniel quickly kicked the old heater beside the wall. Crack sparks exploded immediately. Lights inside the apartment started flashing wildly. Bzzzzzt. The room became filled with electrical noise. The scanner suddenly started making loud sounds. Beep, beep, beep. The armored soldiers looked at the device quickly. The screen on it began showing random symbols and errors. Signal failure, signal failure. Daniel stared with fake surprise. "Oh no," he shouted. "Not again." The soldiers looked around carefully. Electric lights continued blinking everywhere. The main soldier stared at his broken scanner for several seconds. Then finally the red line across his helmet became normal again. "Signal disruption detected," the robotic voice said. Daniel tried very hard not to smile. One of the soldiers looked toward the hallway. "System interference affecting nearby floors," another robotic voice said. The main soldier looked back at Daniel. Long seconds passed. Then finally he lowered the scanner. "Continue inspection elsewhere," he said. Daniel almost stopped breathing completely. The 3 armored figures turned around and slowly walked away. Heavy footsteps disappeared down the hallway. Thump, thump, thump. The apartment became quiet again. Daniel stood there without moving. Then after several seconds, he quickly locked the door. He turned around and opened the storage room immediately. The little girl rushed out and held him tightly. Her small hands shook badly. Daniel slowly sat down on the floor beside her. Breathing heavily, for several seconds neither of them spoke. Then the child looked up at him. Her glowing eyes stared directly into his face. Slowly she lifted her small hand, then touched his chest softly. Blue light suddenly appeared around her fingers. Daniel looked down in shock. Images suddenly entered his mind. Stars, fire, huge ships in space. People running, explosions everywhere, a giant symbol glowing in darkness, and one terrifying voice repeating again and again, "Find the child." Then Daniel saw one final image, and his blood turned cold. He saw Earth, surrounded by thousands of warships. Daniel pulled his hand back immediately. His breathing became heavy, the images disappeared. But the feeling stayed inside his mind. Stars burning, ships moving through darkness. People running, and that terrible voice. Find the child. The little girl looked at him quietly. She looked tired after showing him those strange images. Small drops of sweat appeared on her forehead. Daniel stared at her with wide eyes. What was that? He whispered. The child lowered her head. She looked at the floor without speaking. Daniel slowly sat beside her on the old couch. His heart was still beating fast. Everything was becoming more confusing. Last night he thought he found a lost child. Now strange soldiers were searching buildings, glowing symbols appeared on skin. And images were entering his mind. Daniel looked toward the window. Morning light was slowly becoming brighter outside. People were walking in the streets again. Cars were moving, and life looked normal. But Daniel knew something was very wrong. Then suddenly a loud sound came from outside. Not an explosion, not thunder, something deeper. B-O-O-O-O-O-O-O. The entire apartment shook. The glass on the window started shaking loudly. Daniel stood up immediately and looked outside. His eyes widened. People below had stopped walking. Cars had stopped moving. Everyone was staring upward. Daniel slowly looked toward the sky, and his face became pale. Far above the city, hidden behind dark clouds, something massive was moving. Huge shadows slowly passed across the sky. At first Daniel thought they were storm clouds. Then he realized they were not clouds at all. They were ships, gigantic ships. Dark metal covered the sky like floating mountains. Blue lights moved across their bodies. Some were so huge that they blocked sunlight itself. People below started shouting. Some pointed at the sky, some ran away, others simply stood frozen, unable to understand what they were seeing. Daniel stepped backward slowly. No, he whispered. The little girl suddenly ran toward the window. The moment she saw the ships, fear filled her eyes again. She moved backward immediately, then hid behind Daniel without making a sound. Daniel looked down at her. She was shaking worse than before. Then loud sounds suddenly echoed through the city, emergency alarms. Wee-oo-wee-oo-ee-oo-oh, large screens attached to buildings suddenly turned on. A woman's face appeared on every screen. She looked nervous, almost terrified. Attention all citizens, she said quickly. Please remain calm and stay inside your homes. Unknown objects have entered Earth's atmosphere. Government forces are currently investigating the situation. Remain calm. Daniel almost laughed. Nobody outside looked calm. People were running in every direction now. Then suddenly the screen changed. The woman disappeared. Static filled the display. ZZZZZZZD. Then flickered several times. Then another face appeared, but it was not human. Daniel froze. A tall figure looked directly through the screen. Its skin looked pale silver, and strange glowing symbols moved across its face. Its eyes were cold and emotionless. The creature spoke slowly, but somehow every person understood the words. People of Earth, do not interfere. We seek only one thing. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Beside him, the little girl grabbed his arm tightly. Her hands were shaking badly. The creature continued speaking. A child escaped. Return her immediately. Hide her. The creature stopped speaking for a second. Its face became darker. Then its voice became cold, very cold. And your world will suffer the consequences. Silence filled the apartment. Daniel slowly looked down at the little girl. She stared at the screen with wide, terrified eyes. Then suddenly tears started falling down her face. Not loud crying, just silent tears. Slowly she looked up at Daniel, and in a weak voice, she spoke clearly for the first time. Not strange alien words, not broken sounds, real human words. Very small words, very sad words. She looked directly at him and whispered, "They kill family." Daniel felt his body become completely still. The room stayed silent after the little girl spoke. Outside, emergency alarms continued screaming across the city. People were still running in the streets below. But Daniel could hear only those two words inside his head. They kill family. He slowly looked down at her. Tears continued moving down her small face. She was not looking at the screen anymore. She was looking at the floor. Like she already knew what would happen next. Daniel sat beside her quietly. For a few moments he said nothing. He looked at the giant ships outside. Then back at the little girl, then outside again. Everything inside his mind felt messy. Just yesterday, his biggest problem was paying bills and surviving another boring week. Now warships were floating over Earth, strange soldiers were searching the city. And an alien child was sitting in his apartment crying beside him. Daniel slowly spoke. "Who are you?" The little girl looked up at him. Her eyes looked tired. She touched her chest softly. "Luma," she whispered. Daniel repeated it quietly. "Luma." The little girl nodded slowly. Then she touched Daniel's chest. "Daniel," she said softly. For the first time since he found her, Daniel saw something different on her face. Not fear, not sadness, a very small smile, only for a second. Then, boom, a huge sound exploded outside. The apartment shook violently. The windows cracked instantly. Daniel jumped up and looked outside. Far away in the city, smoke was rising into the sky. People below were screaming now. Flying police vehicles rushed through the streets. Then another explosion happened, and another. Daniel stared in shock. Large black ships had started moving lower between the buildings. Blue lights swept across the city like giant eyes searching for something. Searching for someone. Searching for Luma. Then suddenly every screen in the city changed again. The alien face returned, but this time its expression looked different. "Angry, the child is here," it said coldly. "Our scanners have confirmed her presence." Daniel felt ice run through his body. Presence, they knew she was somewhere in the city. Maybe not the exact place, but they knew she was here. Luma moved closer behind him immediately. Her fingers grabbed his shirt tightly again. Daniel looked down at her. She looked terrified. Like a small child standing in darkness during a storm. Then suddenly a loud metallic sound came from above. Thunk. Daniel looked toward the ceiling. Another sound followed. Thunk thunk. His eyes widened slowly. Something had landed on the roof. No many things. Luma suddenly looked toward the ceiling too. And all color disappeared from her face. Then she whispered one word. "Finders." Daniel frowned. "What?" But before she could answer, crash, the apartment lights exploded. Glass shattered everywhere. The ceiling above them suddenly broke apart. Pieces of metal and concrete fell into the room. Daniel quickly pulled Luma back as the dust filled the apartment. Then shapes slowly appeared inside the smoke. Tall black figures, 4 of them. Their armor looked darker than the soldiers from before, sharper, heavier, more dangerous. Red lights glowed from their helmets like eyes in darkness. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Then one stepped forward. Its robotic voice echoed through the ruined apartment. "Target located." Luma immediately hid behind Daniel. Shaking badly, Daniel looked at the soldiers. Then at the terrified child behind him. Something inside him suddenly changed. He was scared, very scared. But he looked at Luma and realized something. She had nobody, no family, no home, nobody protecting her, only him. Daniel slowly moved forward and stood between Luma and the soldiers. The lead soldier stared at him for a few seconds. Then spoke again. "Move aside, human." Daniel swallowed slowly. His hands were shaking. His legs were shaking too. But he stayed where he was. Then he said something that surprised even himself. "No." For a moment nobody moved. Then the soldier lifted its weapon. And suddenly the blue marks on Luma's skin began glowing brighter than ever before. Daniel pulled his hand back. Daniel stood in front of Luma like a wall. The ruined apartment was silent for 1 second. Then that silence broke like glass. The lead armored soldier raised its weapon higher. Red light from its helmet fixed directly on Daniel's face. "Human," the robotic voice repeated. "Move aside for final warning." Daniel's hands were shaking. But he did not step away. Behind him, Luma was trembling so badly that her small breaths were uneven. The blue marks on her skin were now glowing brighter than ever. Like rivers of light moving under her skin, Daniel swallowed hard. His life until now had been simple, empty, and normal. But now everything was standing on one decision: step aside or protect her. And lose everything. He looked back once at Luma. She was staring at him, not at the soldiers. Not at the broken ceiling, only at him, like he was the only safe thing in her universe. That look changed something inside him, something deep. Daniel slowly exhaled. Then he stepped forward again, not back, forward. The soldier tilted its head slightly. A scanning sound filled the room. Beep. 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 "Human resistance detected," the voice said coldly. The weapon started charging. Blue energy formed at the front like a glowing storm. The air itself felt heavier. Luma suddenly grabbed Daniel's jacket tightly and shouted something in her alien language. But this time, something strange happened. The blue light on her skin exploded outward. A shockwave of glowing energy spread across the room. The soldiers were pushed slightly backward. Their systems flickered for a moment. Daniel stared in shock. "What? Are you?" he whispered. Luma's eyes were glowing now. Not just her skin, she looked scared of her own power. The lead soldier quickly recovered. "Royal energy signature confirmed," it said immediately. "Force extraction approved." The word royal echoed in Daniel's mind. Royal. Before he could think more, the soldier fired. A blue beam shot straight toward them. Daniel acted without thinking. He grabbed Luma and pulled her down. The beam hit the wall behind them and exploded. The entire side of the apartment collapsed. Concrete, metal, and glass flew everywhere. The room was now half destroyed. Open to the night sky, cold wind rushed in, outside. The giant alien ships were now fully visible, covering the sky like a second world above Earth. More smaller ships were landing across the city. Daniel slowly stood up again, holding Luma tightly. She was shaking. But her eyes were now different. Less fear, more determination. Then suddenly, something incredible happened. The glowing marks on her skin expanded across her arms, neck and face, and a soft voice echoed inside Daniel's mind again. Not words this time, feelings, memories. A truth being shared. He saw Luma not as a child, but as something much older, a royal line hunted across galaxies. A child chosen to inherit power that entire civilizations feared. A child who escaped after her entire world was destroyed. Daniel stumbled back slightly, overwhelmed. "No," he whispered. Outside, a massive ship slowly descended directly above the building. Its shadow covered everything. A deep voice echoed from the sky itself. "Luma of Vera, end your escape. The galaxy has come to correct its mistake." Luma stepped forward slowly from behind Daniel. Her small body looked fragile, but the energy around her was no longer fragile at all. She looked up at the giant ship, then back at Daniel, and for the first time, her voice was clear and steady. "No more running," she said softly. Daniel looked at her in shock. But Luma reached out and held his hand. The glow from her skin spread into his arm. Suddenly, Daniel felt something change inside him, like a door unlocking in his mind. He saw soldiers, planets, wars, and something impossible. Humanity standing in the middle of galactic conflict, not as weak prey, but as something that refused to break. Above them, the ship opened a massive gate. Thousands of lights turned on inside it. A final command echoed across Earth: surrender the child, or be erased. Daniel looked at Luma, then at the burning sky, and he finally answered, not with fear, not with confusion, but with one simple word: no.